Hey there, it's me, Dree. So, this is the first story that I feel I need to tell. It's not a highlight reel, it's not an edited version. It's the real story, the one that took me under, and the one that became the foundation that I've built the rest of my life on. So, I'm going to start at the beginning because the cracks, they didn't start in my marriage. They started the moment I found out I was pregnant. I met him in February. By March, I was pregnant. And by the end of May, I was married. You see, I had been raised in a devout Catholic home where premarital pregnancy, it wasn't just a disappointment, it was a total crisis. And when he proposed, the pressure to say yes, it wasn't just about love. It became about atonement. It was the fear of shame, the judgment of the church, the weight of disappointing God. And my mother, she was at the forefront, trying to hold it together for the family, trying to do what she believed was right in God's eyes. But the truth was heavier than anyone wanted to carry. So instead, we all decided the solution was marriage. There was no time to process, no time to think, and definitely there was no time to breathe. It was just a 90-day countdown to a sacred commitment I wasn't even sure I had chosen freely. And no expense was being spared. And that was not because I needed a wedding. It was because the man I was about to marry wanted the appearance of a life we hadn't even actually begun to build. Yes, I was seeing the red flags, but I was pushing them down. Because doing the right thing, it felt more important than asking myself what I actually needed. And I wasn't allowed to fall apart. And I was expected to follow through. So then, 12 days before we were set to say our I do's, we went in to the doctor's for an ultrasound. We had been hoping that day to find out the baby's gender. But what we heard instead was a death sentence. That day we were told, your baby is not expected to survive. And immediately following that appointment, I was admitted into the hospital where they put me into an induced labor. It lasted for 3 days and there was no progress. And then the medication that I was taking hit its limit. So the doctors, the hospital, they sent me home. I was 18 weeks pregnant, carrying grief, waiting to miscarry my first child. I was finishing the seating chart for a wedding I no longer felt I had the strength to attend. And that was the first time I truly broke, quietly. I was publicly smiling, privately falling apart. 2.5 months after my wedding, I came home to a full-blown FBI raid. They had torn apart my home, ripped through all my drawers, tore down my ceiling, went into my walls. And then they said to me, "Your husband has been running from warrants. He's in custody and he's not coming home." I was 7 months pregnant, high risk, carrying a baby no one expected to live. And I stood there that day thinking, how do I even begin to tell my family? So I stayed up all night trying to clean my house, trying to put the pieces back together, and trying to make sense of everything that had just happened. And then, just after midnight, my water broke. At that time, my baby hadn't developed lungs. So I went to the hospital, and the doctors stopped my labor immediately. And then I was kept in the hospital for 2 weeks. I had no amniotic fluid in my stomach. It was just me and this fragile little being I wasn't even allowed to believe in. They told me not to buy a crib. They said that there was no point and that I would just be prolonging my grief. So for 2 weeks, I laid in that hospital bed. I was intercepting calls from the jail, grieving the loss of a man who was still alive, handling calls with his lawyers, and fielding questions from everyone around me about where the father of my child and brand new husband was. Everything had turned to total chaos. So after 2 weeks, they induced me again. And by that point, I had fully surrendered. I told God, "This child is yours. I am simply the vessel that will carry out your will." Right before I delivered, the doctor came in and said quietly, "We can put her to the side, and you can live your life in peace." He thought he was being kind. He thought he was being considerate. But what I felt in that moment was silent rage. No. I told him, "I want you to treat her like you would any other baby born in this hospital." And so when the time came and she was born, she was blue. She wasn't breathing. She was silent. And for a moment, I thought she was gone. But then she was given oxygen. And after a few seconds that felt like eternity, I heard her first cry. She cried loud. She cried full. She was alive. She stayed in the NICU for 21 days. She was diagnosed with a rare birth defect. The road we had ahead, it wasn't going to be easy, but she was here. And in that moment, everything changed. I became a mother in the purest, rawest sense. And I made a vow that whatever it took, I will not let the two people in my life, my husband and my child, fall. I was going to carry my family. So for the next 2 years, I became a wife to a man in prison and a mother to a medically fragile child. My daughter went to therapy 5 days a week, and every weekend we drove to wherever her father was being held, usually hours away, so that he could watch her grow. There was no me anymore. That identity was gone. I chose to be loyal. I chose to stay committed. And I was showing up more to these two people than I had ever shown up in my life before. And I did it because I refused to let myself down. But in doing so, I forgot the woman that I once was. She was gone. And I didn't even have the energy to miss her anymore. When my husband was finally released, I thought that we had gotten our chance. Our family was finally whole. Our reward for the suffering had come. But what came instead was denial, excuses, gaslighting, late nights, money missing, stories that weren't adding up. But I wanted so badly to believe. I ignored what I knew, because if I faced it, I would lose everything I had been working so long for. And then it happened again. He left me to birth our second child, alone. No call, no explanation, nothing. And within a week from that time, a detective came to my door and told me the truth that I never saw coming. My husband had been robbing the very people who had been supporting us, my closest friends, my family, the ones who believed in us the most. And that was it, the final collapse. Because this time, I didn't get back up for him. I got back up for me. I was anchored in survival, not yet healing what was the end of me as a wife and the woman who believed love could fix everything. Grieving the one who stood beside a man while her own soul had vanished. But this wasn't the start of my empowered self. It wasn't some grand rebirth. It was the beginning of me as a mother of 2 small children, a woman carrying all of it, with no roadmap, no help, no softness, just survival. That chapter, it didn't turn me into who I am now. It forced me to become someone who could hold everything without breaking. And I did. I held my daughters. I held my pain. And I held my silence. And I began to build a life that no one could steal from me ever again. I wasn't healed. I wasn't whole. But I was there. And no matter what it took, I was dead set to keep going. I have more stories, many more versions of me that lived and died along my way. But this was the start of my legacy, the beginning of the woman who has done it alone, for them, and then eventually for herself. And the biggest thing along my way that I've come to know is that where there is love, there is light. So I'm sending both of these things to you. And I'll catch you all soon.